you a few thoughts on what the Gita calls Yogakshema. It is a verse, if you look up, if you have a copy of the Gita by your side, if you see chapter 9, 22nd verse, Ananyas chintayanto mam ye janaha paryupasate tesham nityabhiyuktanam yogakshemam vahamyaham. Person who meditating on me as non-separate, worship me in all beings, to them thus ever zealously engaged, I carry what they lack and preserve what they already have. So I would like to spend a few minutes discussing what this Yogakshema is. One thing that we have often seen is, as devotees, whenever we are in need of something, we feel we should pray to God for it. And our prayer to God becomes effective only based on how much faith we have that God is listening to what I am praying for, and God has the ability to give me what I want. At the same time, we often feel the need to even ask other people to pray for us. Whenever there's a difficulty, we say, and those who believe in the power of prayer believe that if a group of people pray for something, that prayer becomes even more powerful, more effective. We also believe that if some holy person prays for us, that will be even more effective. That's why oftentimes, sometimes we say, please pray for me. We ask the people whom we revere and respect and people who we believe are saintly, we ask them to pray for us. In fact, in the Christian tradition, saints are often seen as intercessors. They intercede on behalf of human beings. And somehow it is believed that God listens to the prayers of the saints, perhaps on a priority basis. The saints pray, they have a less waiting period than when we pray. So we ask saints to pray. What's often seen, though, that even though all these saints, they pray for us, very seldom are they seen to be praying for themselves. Somehow we see that whatever they want, whatever they need, seems to get fulfilled in their lives somehow. And among the examples, there are hundreds of such examples. But for the devotees of Ramakrishna, we know, for instance, this once Sri Ramakrishna wanted to have a small kutia built in the Panchavati area. He wanted to spend time in meditation there. And no sooner that thought had come to his mind, the very next day, next morning, he found that along with the tide in the Ganga, a few things necessary to build that kutia, it just came along with the water. He didn't have to ask anybody. He didn't pray even to the Divine Mother. Oh, Mother, please, I have to build this kutia, send me something. Just the thought came in his mind and it happened. Then we also read in Ramakrishna's life that a thought came in his mind that, oh, I would like to meet with these pure-souled devotees. And then we find one by one those who later became the first generation, those whom we see as direct disciples of Ramakrishna, they appeared. We see such cases happening in the lives of many of the disciples of Ramakrishna as well. And of course, as I said, if you look at the lives of other saints and prophets, you'll find many, many, many such examples. So we cannot dismiss these events as just coincidences. There's something to be said about this phenomenon that God seems to be taking a special care of all these people, these saintly people. And a devotee sometimes might think, oh, how wonderful it would be if God would start taking care of me as well, the way God is taking care of all these great ones. And then we realize, of course, there is a difference because they have given their whole being to the divine. They remain immersed in the thought of the divine all the time. And we realize, well, it's something that I would like to do, but right now I'm not able to do it. For whatever reason, I might have a 100 reasons to explain why I'm not able to give myself entirely to my spiritual pursuits. And then, but one day we do dream, we do hope that one day we will reach that stage. And then it makes sense to feel that when I reach that state, God will take care of me. But until I reach that state, of course, I have to take care of myself, and who else will take care of me? So until I reach that state, I need to also take care of myself. And then ultimately that once God will do so. The problem with that is, what comes first? Does God start taking care of me and then I no longer have to take care of myself? Or I have to take care of myself until God starts taking care of me? We have heard, many of us have heard, and certainly in my childhood, we had heard this from our school and from many elders, from our teachers, that God helps those who help themselves. And that kind of seems to make sense, that why would God's help go to someone who is lazy, who doesn't want to do anything, who wants to shirk their responsibilities? And so it makes sense to believe that God helps those who help themselves. But Swami Vivekananda, in the talks that he gave in a big retreat, 7-week retreat that he gave at Thousand Island Park in upstate New York, Swami Vivekananda once made the statement, God helps those who do not help themselves. Now, what he meant was, whenever we feel the need to help ourselves, whenever we feel I must take care of myself, there is this ego which is prominent within us, that we feel my I as a sense of agency, that my ego is a karta, and I have a sense of experiencing everything. That is why bhokta. So karta and bhokta. So as long as I feel that I have to take care of myself, God will say, okay, if you have to take care of yourself, that's fine. There's one little less work for me. And God will then go to take care of those who are not able to take care of themselves. And we see that oftentimes even in our own daily life. We pay special attention, a mother or a father will pay special attention to those of their children who are not able to take care of themselves. Because those who are able to take care of themselves, the parents don't have to so much worry about. So God is our divine parent. And God would say, well, you are capable of taking care of yourself, so take care of yourself. But if God finds someone, oh, this person really needs help, then God would go to help them. So that's the dilemma that we have. One way of looking at it, think about it this way. The idea that sometimes God will take, and there is this other belief that I should also mention, that God takes care of God's devotees. Again, we feel the truth of this, but it also militates against the idea that everyone is God's children. So why would God take care of only, even to say his devotees? I'll say, God, I will have to kind of switch between her devotee and his devotee, because again, to ascribe gender to God is problematic. But why would God take care of only the devotees and not of everyone? So there are all these questions come up. Does God take care of everyone? Because you think about it this way, because God takes care of those God helps those who help themselves. We understand there is some truth in that. We also understand the truth that God helps those who do not help themselves. So then which really end up, if you add these two, means God takes care of everyone who help themselves and who do not help themselves. But that is not what we see. If we look at the world around us, it doesn't seem like everyone is being helped equally by God. Clearly, there are a lot of people who have things rather happening easily in their lives with hardly any effort, and we are able to understand easily that well, God is helping them. And there are other people who are like struggling, working hard, and having so many difficulties, and it feels as if God is not helping them that much. So that God is helping all becomes problematic. We cannot also say God is not helping anybody. But there is, in fact, a verse in the Gita. It goes like this: Na datte kasyachit papam, na chaiva sukritam vibuhu, ajnanena avritam jnanam, tena muhyanti jantavaha. Na adatte kasyachit papam. Actually, this verse in the Gita is very rarely quoted, because it's not that comforting. Because what Krishna is really saying here is, Na adatte kasyachit papam. Krishna says, I do not accept anybody pap. Lot of time people say, God, take away my sorrow, my suffering, take away everything. And what Krishna is really saying is, I don't accept. Na adatte kasyachit papam, na cha sukritam in punyam. So neither punya nor papa, that is your thing. Keep it with you. I don't accept your papa, I don't accept your punya. Then why do we even think that God will take away all our sorrow and suffering? And even sometimes we say God, even we see in Sri Ramakrishna's life, he offered everything to the Divine Mother. And this verse of the Gita says, I don't accept. You may give whatever you want. I am not neither going to accept your bad karmas nor good karmas. The second line of that verse says, Ajnanena avritam jnanam. Knowledge is covered by ignorance. Tena muhyanti jantavaha. That is why people are deluded. So, what is the meaning of knowledge is covered by ignorance? And that is that the knowledge that is referred to here is the knowledge that we are neither the doers nor the experiencers. I'm neither the karta nor the bhokta. I neither do things nor do I experience things. But this knowledge is covered by ignorance. Tena muhyanti janta. That is why people get deluded. That is why every one of us feels, oh, I have to do these things. And when I do things, I do experience sukha and dukkha in my life. And so this verse seems to suggest that God doesn't accept neither our papa punya. God is pretty much unconcerned with what's happening. So all these things create a lot of doubts. A lot of times when we look at the Gita, if we look at it superficially, then it's like, oh, this is so nice and Krishna takes care of me. It just kind of feels very good. But then the moment you start asking too many questions, then a lot of doubts come. Oh, this seems to make sense. The other thing also seems to make sense. What is exactly happening? Does God help everybody or does God help nobody? Will God help me if I help myself, or God will help me if I don't help myself? Now, one thing kind of seems to make sense, that I should try to help myself. But at some point, I will realize that I cannot help myself. That it was my delusion which made me think I can take care of myself. But when we understand the utter helplessness that we cannot do anything by our own, it is then that we say, Lord, I'm in southern India, in Ramanuja's teaching, there is a concept of what is called prapatti. Prapatti means I'm completely surrendering myself to the divine. Now that surrender to God does not occur as long as the ego is very strong. Because as long as the ego is strong, we'll continue to feel I can take care of myself. So that ego needs to be crushed. You might remember in the Kathamrita, the Gospel of Ramakrishna, during the first 2 or 3 visits of M says, it was right in the beginning, a series of questions that Sri Ramakrishna asked M, and M says, my ego was crushed. So only when our ego is totally crushed, then we say, Sharanagata, Sharanagata. So it seems it makes sense that we must try to help ourselves until we realize that we cannot help ourselves. It is in that context that this verse in the chapter 9, 22nd verse, the Yogakshema can be understood in a way. Now, word Yogakshema, as described in the Gita, means 2 things, yoga and kshema. Now, yoga really means, well, yoga, you know the meaning of yoga. But in the phrase Yogakshema, yoga means bringing whatever I need in life, and kshema means protecting what I already have. So this is the way God takes care of us, that whatever we need, God brings it to us, yoga, and whatever we have, God preserves it. So Yogakshema, this is what God does. When will God do that? And that is what it describes. So let's look at that verse again. Ananyas chintayanto mam. This is chapter 9, verse 22. Ananyas chintayanto mam. Mam means me. Those people who meditate on me, or think of me as non-separate. Now, there are 2 ways this phrase can be understood. Non-separate means not necessarily in the non-dualistic sense, not from the perspective of jnana. It means that when we develop an intense love for God, at that time a bhakta doesn't say, God, you and I are one. But what does happen is that the bhakta's I completely recedes into the background. So God is all that remains in a devotee's mind. You can see that when you're doing puja or when you're praying, in the beginning of that puja, in the beginning of the prayer, you are aware of the fact, I am now praying, I am now doing puja. So there is this deity on the altar, you are doing puja, and you know that you are doing puja. So there is clearly a duality. You, that is, I am now doing puja of the Lord. But if my mind completely immerses in that practice of that prayer or puja, then every moment I'm not thinking, I'm doing puja, I'm doing puja. We are not doing like that. So when the mind gets completely immersed, that awareness that I'm doing the puja, that is not prominent at all. At that time, just the object of my worship, the object of my prayer, that is where I'm completely focused. So even in the mind of a bhakta, that non-separateness means this one side of this I completely vanishes. There is no separation because God alone remains. So one who is so immersed in thinking of God, when God alone remains in their mind, ye janaha paryupasate, and who perceives or worships, upasate, pari upasate, who worships or acknowledges the presence of God, Janaha, in everyone, in everything around us. So not only is one giving oneself wholly in prayer and worship and meditation on the divine, but sees that same divine in everyone and everything around. Tesham nitya abhiyuktanam, such people who are nitya, constantly engaged in their pursuit of the divine, it is to such people that I carry what they lack and preserve what they have. So what this verse is really saying is, things always happen in life. Now, for instance, now, the basic needs that all of us have, food, shelter, clothing, and whatever other necessities that we have in life, how do they come? And one way of looking at that is to say, well, I work hard for it. I work for it, that is why I get it. And that is not wrong, but that way of thinking is a lower truth, if you like. Swami Vivekananda once said, we are not going from error to truth, but from truth to truth, a lower truth to a higher truth. So the idea that I'm working hard and I'm getting all these things that I have as a result of my hard work is true, but that's a lower truth. The higher truth is that whatever comes to me in my life comes to me because that was meant to come to me. If that was meant to come to me, then even if I would not do anything at all, it would still come to me. But I do those things, I work hard to get those things, and I make this link that my working hard is the cause and the things that I get are the effect. But that's a wrong connection. That is why Krishna said in that verse, Tena muhyanti jantavaha. People are deluded because they make this wrong cause and effect relationship. That whatever things come to me as a result of my work. So if we look upon our existence in that way, that things are happening, Prakriti, nature is continuously functioning, that I get in my life only that which I deserve. And that which I don't deserve, that which is not meant to come to me, I can work hard, I can move heaven and earth, I can do everything, but if it was not meant to come to me, it's never going to come to me. And if something was going to come to me, then it might come even if I don't do anything specific to get it. But because we don't recognize it, there is this one verse which is a favorite verse of mine. It's from another book called Panchadashi. And it is this, Yat abhavi natad bhavi, bhavi chet natadanyatha, iti chinta vishagnoyam bodho brahma nivartakaha. It's a simple verse, but it's a little bit like that, ke sara sara. Yat abhavi natad bhavi, that which is not going to happen will not happen. Bhavi chet, if something is going to happen, natadanyatha, it will definitely happen. Knowing this, wise ones become free from the poison of anxiety. And that is what this Yogakshema verse is about. That whatever I'm going to get in life will come to me no matter what. Whatever I'm not going to get in life will never come to me no matter what. In between, because of our deluded stage, our ego gets in the way and think, oh, if I do this, I'll get it. And because I didn't do this, I didn't get that. All that way of thinking is wrong. So what this verse meant, to come back to that Yogakshema verse, what Krishna is saying is, if somebody who wants to give themselves wholly to God should not have to hold back with the thought that if I give myself completely to God, then who will take care of me? I won't be able to do my work. I won't be able to go for my job. How can I pay my bills? Who will take care of my family? And all these seems to be legitimate concerns. And as long as these concerns are very real, we will not be able to give our whole thing, ourselves completely to God. But when I have this faith, one other thing, it's not always often a very intellectual decision. It's not like we have to just kind of sit one day and say, should I give myself wholly to God or not? It's never thought out that way. When the heart becomes filled with love for God, we won't stop ourselves. That time we will not pause to weigh the pros and cons of giving up everything for God. It won't happen. That's why sometimes in the Ramakrishna order, some lot of young men come with the idea of becoming monks. And when they're kind of thinking about it, and they visit our centers now and then, and when we kind of find them analyzing it too much, it's like, should I join the order or not? What will happen if I join? What happens if I don't join? And maybe should I join now, or should I wait for a year or two? Too much of concerns about this, you pretty much know that no, it's not going to happen. And those who actually come, they just come. They don't analyze. Not that they don't think about it at all, but they don't obsess over the fact for the right time to do it or the right way to do it. It's a little bit like when we are hungry, like really dying of hunger. That time you are not worried about whether I should sit here and eat or sit there, or should I have a plate or should I eat in my hand. If you're dying of hunger, the first thing is you just want to eat. Doesn't matter. So when my heart becomes filled with love for God, when my heart feels filled with just this longing for the spiritual ideal, then I will stop calculating. And what Krishna is giving in this verse is a promise that even if the slightest bit of hesitation is there in your mind, that, oh, if I do this, then who will take care of me? I'm here to take care of you. If you reach a stage in life when you cannot do anything by yourself, you're all the time thinking of God, you're seeing God everywhere, then I will take care of everything. And we see that in the case of Ramakrishna. He wasn't like, oh, this is so worshipping in Kali temple, it's such a boring thing. I think I'd better now just go and start meditating. Or he didn't say, I'm just tired of this. I just don't feel like doing puja. So it's better to let me go and pray. It didn't happen that way. As long as he was capable of doing it, he did. Sri Ramakrishna was very meticulous, very careful, very regular in his puja. But a stage reached in his life that he didn't give up the puja. Puja gave him up. He didn't stop working. The work gave him up. And when he became incapable of doing, he was a salaried job he had at the Dakshineshwar temple. He was being paid a monthly salary. But when he became incapable of doing that work, he didn't have to apply for unemployment benefits. That was taken care of by God. Then Ma Kali said, I'll take care. You got a nice room in the Kali temple, and Mother sent the providers. In Bengali say Rasaddar. There's Mathur Babu and Balaram Basu, and we find many names. They came unasked for. Sri Ramakrishna didn't go and ask them, oh, please come and take care of me. Without his asking anybody, it was the Divine Mother she made all arrangements and took care of him. So when we reach that stage in our own life, we will be taken care of as well. So we should not obsess so much over the idea that, oh, I would like to, because there are sometimes people who say, oh, I would really like to be meditating all the time and thinking of God all the time, what to do. I've got so many responsibilities. I need to do this, which is not wrong, but which is not right also, because it's not simply that my responsibilities are holding me back. It's also my inability to think of God all the time that's holding me back. And sometimes our duties and responsibilities become just an excuse for me to, that seems somehow a better way to justify why I'm not giving myself to my spiritual pursuits more. That seems to kind of a more comforting thought rather than saying, I'm not able to do it. That's the thing. So this verse, I would encourage you to read this verse and think about it and see what kind of a role Yogakshema plays in our life. So we have I'll restrict my comments for this so that we have a little bit more time for questions and discussion today, because we'll stop this at 11. Then we have a children's hour at 11 o'clock. So we have another about around little more than 20 minutes. So feel free to share your thoughts and ideas about this, or any other idea that might come in the Gita.
Like yesterday, you can type that you have a question, or you can type the question itself, but preferably type that you have a question. Maharaj, Jeff has a question.
Yep, please.
Maharaj, thank you so much. Good morning. So I'm thinking about something you mentioned earlier in your talk, about how sometimes we see these expressions in the scriptures where it sounds like God has favorites. I come to my devotees, or I was thinking of in the Katha Upanishad where it says, the self chooses, the self is revealed to those whom it chooses, and so on. Mm-hmm. And that does create that disturbing sense of favoritism. Would it be more correct to say that God is always there for everyone, but maybe only we become aware of it when we become devoted, or when we open our minds in a certain way, but that it's always there?
Absolutely. That's Sri Ramakrishna gives a similar teaching with regard to God's grace when he said, not that God gives grace to some and not to others, but that God's grace is like the breeze which is constantly blowing, mm-hmm. and then we have to set the sail to catch that breeze. So God is always present for everyone, and it's that our lack of awareness of that fact is what makes the difference. Then here, in the case of Yogakshema, it's really our own ego is the barrier. Mm-hmm. So everyone is being provided for. There is this verse in the Gita, Tameva chadyam purusham prapadye yata pravrittihi prasruta purani. What it means is pravritti, all initiative, all work really comes from that primal being. So whatever is being done in the world is really being done by God. So even the food that comes to my plate every day when I sit for eating, I'm deluded if I think, I worked hard for it and that's why I'm getting it. A bhakta sees that everything, the air I breathe, the water I drink, the food I eat, is coming through God's grace. That I have not done anything at all. Mm. But because of that ego, I feel, no, I have worked for it and I did it. So God is already taking care of all of us. And those whose ego has gotten out of the way, recognize it. Those whose ego is still there, they don't recognize it. That's the idea.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Arundhati Di and then Shekhar.
Thank you, Hari. Maharaj, and Pranam Maharaj. The question, it could be just a thought that what we have to do is that we have to give our everything to God, like Atma Shamarpan, what we call it. Give everything to God, and then everything will be, other things will be taken care of. Is that the way we should think about?
Yes.
Total dedication. That's what I mean.
Yes. To give everything to God really means to recognize that it is already God's. Because
okay.
the thing say, I cannot say I am giving my everything to God. It really means that what I saw as mine up to this point is not really mine. It is really, there is a phrase, say, Ganga Jole, Ganga Puja. So in Bengal sometimes there is a one day in a year which is meant for worship of Mother Ganga. And now puja is normally done inside a mandir. Now, and for doing puja, oftentimes wherever possible, we use Ganga water, Ganges water, because it's considered holy. Now, when you have to worship Ganga, there is a day for Ganga puja. So I don't know, sometimes if you go to the Belur Math website, you will see they have pictures of the Ganga puja there. So that puja is done on in the river, in the ghat, one of the steps, the ghat to the Ganga. So the pujari and all the puja vessels are taken because the deity being worshipped is Mother Ganga. Now you use Ganges water for all puja. Now what water shall we use for Ganga puja? Well, you use Ganga water for Ganga puja. So it's kind of, it looks odd. You're taking water from the river and then you're offering it to the river. So the river water is being used to worship the river. So whatever we are giving to God is already God's. So we cannot even give anything to God, which is not already God's. So when we say giving everything to God, really ends up means acknowledging that whatever I saw up to this point as mine is not mine. That was already God's. Yes, so what you said is right. But this is the way we can look at it.
Okay. Thank you, Maharaj.
Hari, can I speak now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Maharaj, my name is Shekhar Bhattacharya. I'm not in Pittsburgh, I'm in State College, Pennsylvania. When you were talking about Sri Ramakrishna Dev's, the puja went off, like say at a point when he was trying to do tarpan and the water, he no longer can hold it. Maharaj, is it not safe to say that we have to first do that amount of practice when it actually happens? So if we say, like say, I do not have to do anything, God is taking care of us, maybe that's a very fraudulent statement. So you have to go through all the hardship you have to do before the Yogakkama happens. So it very often, like say, we do maybe, 6 months of meditation, I'm done, I don't have to do anything. So what is your take on that?
No, it's not a question of saying. It's not just, I mean, anybody can say, well, God is doing everything, I don't have to do it. Just saying is pretty easy. It's actually experiencing that. Only when I truly recognize that I'm incapable of doing anything, only then the ego will be crushed. But as long as the ego is there, even an egoistic person says, oh, I'm a nobody. But there is a strong ego inside. So it's not just a matter of saying it. It's a matter of recognizing it. And as long as the ego is strong, we cannot not do things. We will do things, whether we like it or not. When the ego is strong, we will feel we have duties and responsibilities, no matter what we say. It's not just a matter of using the right words, but actually experiencing it.
So when Yogakkama actually happens, it will, like God, who will make us understand that this is happening. So it's not that I decide to stop. anything. So you experience and you understand that God has now started taking care of me. And at that point, whether or not I'm trying to do anything, it's just beyond me. He is taken care of. He's in the steering wheel, and I'm just a control. And
that's exactly the question that is there. That should I keep on doing things until God takes care of me, or a time will reach when I'm incapable of doing things and God will take care? Which happens first? That's the question. And the answer to that is that God is already taking care of me even now, even when I think that I'm taking care of myself. That it's my delusion that I think I'm taking care of myself. So when that knowledge, that awareness dawns on me, then I become free. Until that time, irrespective of what I say, because a lot of time people read in books and then they start saying things like that. Because a lot of times I've heard many devotees say, "Oh, sab my richa, oh, it's all due to Thakur's will and Mother's will." A lot of times these are just empty words, because even when people, they're the right things, and the words are great. Everything happens through Thakur's will, everything happens to Mother's will. But that's not what people are experiencing. That seems only aspirational. Because if someone truly believes that it's everything in my Icha and Thakur's Icha, then they don't, every little thing that is happening in their life, they don't think it's Mother's Icha or Thakur's Icha. Only certain times, certain things, we suddenly remember, oh, this is the Mother's will. So if it is Mother's will, if it is Thakur's will, then every little thing is Thakur's will. Every breath I take is a Thakur's will. Every step I go is Thakur's will. But we haven't reached that stage. And as long as we have not reached that stage, merely saying, oh, it's my richa, they're just empty words. That's what I'm saying.
Yes, sorry for taking too long. So basically it comes from, like, say, as Ramakrishna, as Thakur himself said, like, say, maybe the light will come just in a certain moment, or maybe somebody to take, who are we to think, like, whether it will take me, say, several years or a few seconds. That's so true. when it happens, then we are, that now you have experience, as you are saying several times, like, once the experience happens, then you really, you can't speak that out. You feel that you are being taken care of.
You see, again, I think it's kind of I understand the difficulty. Let me tell you one incident. So one of our monks in the 50s is an American monk. He joined the monastery in San Francisco, and he was there in the center for about 5 or 6 years. He is under Swami Ashokanandaji. And then after 5 or 6 years, he felt, just tried to look within and say, well, how far have I advanced in my spiritual life? Because clearly, he, like all of us, he wanted to be enlightened. He wanted to realize God. And so after 5 years, he kind of looked within and said, well, how much closer have I gone to realizing God? So then he goes to the Swamiji there, Swami Ashokanandaji, and then says, this is what I've been doing daily in my spiritual practice. What more do I need to do in order to become enlightened? And what Swami Ashokanandaji told him was, what are you waiting for? That, oh, one day I'll become enlightened and then blah, 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 these things will happen. He says, why don't you start living now as if you're already enlightened? Clearly, you won't be able to do it perfectly, but that's what an effort you have to make. So what I'm saying is, it's not that, oh, only when God will start taking care of me, then that time God will come and tell me, okay, now don't take care of yourself because I will take care of you from tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock. It's not going to happen that way. Right now, even when my ego is strong, I have to keep reminding myself that God is already doing everything. It's my ego that is making me think I'm doing it. And the more often I keep reminding myself, it'll change the way I look upon my work, my responsibilities, the life and world around me. And that is the way I will be able to hasten that transition. I cannot say I'm going to continue living the way I'm living now until God will take care of me. No, it will never happen that way. Right now, I'll have to keep on, I still have to do everything, but even when I'm doing everything, I'll have to remind myself that God is really doing it. That is what spiritual practice means.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Ayush. Ayush, you can ask.
Oh yes, sorry, my thing was on mute. Sorry. Pranam Maharaj. I want to ask about this relative definition of grace that we all have, and maybe I'll put it this way. You see, take the life of say Kunti, Prahlad, Draupadi, Tulsidas Ji, Mirabai in current times, even Holy Mother. Their lives are not easy. If we look by our definitions, that is coming from a state of privilege. They led a life of all like it was a very difficult life, and whereas they were bad people, maybe I say Ravana or Duryodhana or say Hiranyakashipu and all these people, they lived the life of all riches, which many people would say that that's a grace that they are getting. Now we know that the bhaktas or the people, the first side which I mentioned, they were happy in the state of the miseries also, and they felt that it is a grace as well. So in Srimad Bhagavatam, Kunti says that to Shri Krishna that it's a grace that you have lived with me all the times of miseries as well, and so it seems like that there is a relative definition of grace for each and every one of us. For some, it seems like getting the worldly riches is the grace. For others, it has a different meaning. And I think all the contradictions that is coming because we have this different definitions of grace. Like sometimes something doesn't happen in the way we want, and we feel that we don't have the grace of the God, but maybe it is for the good that something didn't really happen. And we are not able to see beyond. And that short-sightedness makes us feel that we don't have the grace of God. So I'm not able to make this, I'm not able to get to the piece about this relative definition of the grace. What would be an absolute definition of grace in your opinion?
Well, I don't think grace is a relative thing. I think you mentioned that some people are like Ravana was rich and wealthy and prosperous, and that is a grace in one form. I don't think being rich in itself is an act of grace. And I don't think that being poor is itself an act of like some kind of a punishment. I don't think wealth or poverty are any indication. I think essentially how I would see is more in terms of sukha and dukkha. If you want to think it of karma, it's possible to be very wealthy and be totally miserable. It is possible to be very poor and yet be very contented. And so therefore, just being wealthy, I would not call it, just the wealth itself, I wouldn't say is any grace of that person. So grace, in my view, grace would be limited to what is really the state of mind of that person. Whether it's an inner thing rather than an external manifestation. And if you see an inner thing, then it doesn't have to be relative. One way would be that any kind of phenomenon that will take me closer to my own true nature, that will help me go closer to God. That's grace. Anything that will take me away from my true nature, take me away from God, that is lack of grace. And so I don't think that would, I think that would, I would imagine that would fulfill this thing, and there's nothing relative about it.
So Maharaj, then if I may say, then the first line that we started with, say, God help those who help themselves. It doesn't. I'm not able to fit it. I agree with what you said, but I'm not able to fit that line, because that line is more relative. It seems to me more relative to a standard definition of the world about.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, I mean, there's nothing very philosophical about it.
Yeah.
God, those who will help themselves. It is essentially based on the idea that if I'm shirking my duties and responsibilities out of laziness, then I'm not going to get God's help. That's the kind of experience or the wisdom that people have had, which says that lazy, tamasic people who are avoiding work are not fit for grace. And I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but this is how human beings have thought, which is why gave rise to that saying, God helps those who help themselves. And it seems to make sense to us at some level. But as I said, even the opposite of it also makes sense. God helps those who do not help themselves. So that's the thing. These both statements, which seem mutually contradictory, both of them seem to make sense. And that's why this is an interesting topic to discuss.
Uma Bhagini, go ahead.
Pranam Maharaj. So the question is basically, all these great people had this abiding, unquestioning faith. So, but to reach that high stage, the building blocks were all the efforts that they did over lives or several lives. So is that where this thing of those who help themselves and those who do not help themselves come, that initially it is human effort, but effort in the right things, in what is dharmic things, and then you reach like that high magnetic field where it becomes, you get, because faith is not something we all have to that extent, like that unquestioning faith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you
So,
can say we should make an effort, give a full effort to something until we realize that we cannot do anything. We should do everything until we realize we cannot do anything. There is a story that Sri Ramakrishna used to tell about a bird which sat on the mast of a ship. And he said he was just sitting there and the ship set sail, went deep inside the ocean, and then this bird woke up. But it has its nest on the land and it really didn't want to go with the ship. So it then flew towards the east, hoping to find land, and then couldn't find, and its wings got tired. So again came back and sat on the mast. Went in all different directions, but found land nowhere. So it just came and sat on that mast. And then the ship then ultimately reached land, and it was able to find land there. So it is also possible to see that all of our struggles, in fact, all of our spiritual practices, everything is not so much meant to achieve anything other than just tiring our wings. When our wings are totally exhausted, then even if we want to go somewhere, we cannot. And then we just go and just sit there on the mast of the ship. So as long as our ego is strong, as long as I feel I'm capable of doing this and that and this and that, I should do, until I get so exhausted, until I know that no matter how much I try, no matter how long I try, it's never going to happen. Then that ego is completely crushed. And then I say, let me just go and just surrender fully to God, and then God will take care. So we keep on taking care of ourselves until we realize we cannot take care of ourselves. That's the idea.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Arup.
Pranam Swamiji.
Yeah.
Okay, basically I said I will have one question. I have two. First one, it's not directly related to the sloka that you just explained. The word ahankar, as I understand, ahang, self, atma, dehi, karma. So it is as if the atma or self doing the work. And we all know the ahankar is bad thing. So I am confused when I do this sandhi vichhed, when I analyze this word. If you could explain on that. And the second one.
No, that your sandhi vichhed is not right.
Okay.
Ahankara doesn't mean Atman doing thing. No, Atman doesn't do anything.
Okay.
So ahankar means simply that faculty within us which give the sense of aham, the I-ness. And that's not the Atman.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's not the Atman.
So it's not self doing the work.
Well, it's the false self doing the work.
Okay.
Not the real self.
Is that the subtlety that we miss it? That falseness, the false self doing the work? So in other words, one has to understand the inner meaning of that word, or is it very self-explanatory?
No, your question is not clear.
That particular word, if someone understands the meaning of the word, the syllables, is that explicit or is there a subtle meaning to it? You just said the false self doing the work. That is the misconception.
Yes, what that aham means, that looking upon our body, mind, intellect, and seeing them as me, as aham, that is what makes it the false self.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that aham, what I was telling as Atman, is not that right thing. I was not meaning it right.
Atman, as it is used in the Gita generally, is for something that transcends identification with the body and mind, something that is different from the body and mind.
Okay, it is the sense of aham. Okay. And the second is, if you could elucidate on these two words, daya and kripa. These two words often confuses me.
Daya, it's often translated as compassion, and kripa is often translated as grace. So they are not same. They are not same. They are two different words.
And so both? Well, Swami Vivekananda once said only those who are brave or courageous can do the daya. Daya is a quality or act of the person who can afford to do. But kripa is a grace. It's only can be by God, and that kind of.
If you can point me to that actual quote, it might be easier to then discuss it, because we'll have to see the context.
Yeah, I don't have that right in at this point. So daya can be shown by those who can afford to give or do or act.
Again, we'll have to see the context. The word daya, depending on the context, is used in many different ways.
If
there
you
is no
please
just
explain,
one.
your ways, then would be okay. I'm a little bit confused about these
No, as I said, the
words.
word daya can be used in many different ways. There is no one absolute way to explain daya because I mean, one place daya, Sri Ramakrishna says, you cannot show compassion on anyone. You can only serve them, looking upon them as the manifestation of the divine. So daya there doesn't seem to be like the best thing. So as I said, we'll have to, if you can give me a specific quote or a specific place where the word is used, it is an easier to discuss it than to just take an isolated word and then say something about it.
Understood. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have 3 more questions, and that will be the last. Malati has a comment she would like to share.
Yeah.
Pranams Maharaj.
Yeah.
Ramana Maharshi, when he left his home at 16 years of age, and he went to Arunachala Hill, his mother looked for him, searched, and begged him to return home. And then he said, whatever has to happen will happen, no matter what we do to stop that. And whatever is destined not to happen will not happen, no matter however hard we try. So I think that is very similar to what
Oh yeah.
has to be.
That comes in the Panchadashi also, very similar verse.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mahua, go ahead.
Sorry, Guruji. I know children are waiting, and I don't want to take too much of your time. But I want to just ask a very simple question to sort of keep it quick. I was wondering how should we interpret failure? We do a lot of things, and we don't find it going a certain way, and should we just say that it was not meant to be, and God is not wanting this to happen? So should we just let it go and be comforted in knowing that certain things are not meant to be? Or shall we just sort of say, this was not enough effort? And I think I'm sort of slipping back to that I and me ego realm, but should I then say that better to work on some other thing and forget about it?
Well, I don't think there is one answer to that. It will just vary from the specificities of different situations, and we just have to make our own judgment call on it, whether to kind of just say, okay, this was not meant to be, let me move to something else, or say, yeah, maybe I need to work harder, maybe I need to do it in a little different way, or do something. And maybe after repeated times trying it, and still if it doesn't work, then maybe one might be more predisposed to then thinking, well, I think maybe it's just not meant to be. But it's very difficult to kind of say this, what the answer is. It just it can vary from a specific instances.
I get it. Thank you.
Maharaj, this question is on behalf of Indranil. He's asking, how is Shraddha, and what is Shraddha, and how can we maintain the Shraddha during difficult times?
Shraddha is one of the most important qualities necessary in spiritual life. In fact, the Kathopanishad begins with Shraddha. It says, Shraddha entered into the heart of Nachiketa. Shraddha is what we need until we have a direct experience. Because the only thing that can hold us onto our spiritual practice is Shraddha. Because we read something in the books, we read something in the Gita and the Upanishad. How do we know it's true? How do we know it's real? If I've actually experienced it, then it's different. If I've not experienced it, I need to have faith in the words of the Gita and the Upanishad. And why do I need to have faith? Because in order for me to do any sadhana, in order for me to do any spiritual practice, I am investing some time of my life. I'm investing my time, I'm investing my energy. And if I'm making that investment, I need to know what returns are going to get. Just like any investment, if you make a good investment, there are good returns. If you make a bad investment, then you lose. So in spiritual life, we are making an investment. And so we want to make sure that we'll have good returns. Now, every investment is kind of a gamble. But then even people when buy shares in a stock market, you need to have some faith. Oh, if I buy the shares of this company, then this will bring me good returns. So a kind of shraddha is necessary even while investing money. And it's even more necessary in spiritual life because you are investing your own life into something. And therefore shraddha is very important. And yes, there will be times when shraddha can get a little shaky. Sometimes people, if the shraddha is very weak and the people experience a lot of challenges and difficulties in life, there are people then who feel, oh, what's the use of believing in God? What's the use of praying? God didn't do this for me. And there are people who have just stopped going to church or temple or mosque or whatever their tradition, saying, God didn't help me when I needed it. And so I'm not going to worship God. I'm not going to pray to God. So then the shraddha was really very weak. But if the shraddha is strong, then a bhakta will think about it in a different way. Then no matter how much difficulties and how much struggle, the bhakta will feel, this is God's way of loving me. God wants me to go through these very difficult challenges to make me stronger. So shraddha will make me see even difficulties as a way of God's helping me in a way that I cannot fathom, in a way that I cannot understand right now. So even if I don't understand how it can be an act of love when God is sending all these challenges to me, shraddha, it is shraddha that will see, it will keep my faith in God. It is that shraddha that will make me realize that even in this, God is still by my side. God is still helping me. That's the idea.
Susmita ji has a question. Susmita ji, you have to unmute.
Yeah. Maharaj,
Hmm.
Pranam Maharaj, my question is a different one, Maharaj.
Mm-hmm.
That's a wonderful retreat we had with you and having. May we be blessed to have another retreat from you wherever you are available on the same topic, Maharaj.
Yeah, after the pandemic is over.
Whenever, Maharaj. Online is fine, Maharaj.
Yeah.
Yes, Maharaj.
Yeah, I think we can plan something. Since it's online, it's much easier. You don't have to travel or anything, so it's a little bit easier. Yeah, after maybe let some time go.
Yeah.
Immediately after this, I think it will be difficult, but let's some time in the weeks and months ahead.
Yeah, maybe after 3 months or something, Maharaj, I will contact you again.
Yeah.
Maharaj, Pranam Maharaj, it was like, I'm so delighted. It's so good, Maharaj. Everybody is happy with the retreat. Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah.
Pranam.
Thank you.